it's back to school for most kids in North Carolina. The real question is, are they safe? And after the Uvalde shooting, it's a question that's on the minds of so many parents, not just in North Carolina, not just in Texas, but across the country. And how do we keep children safe? With me today, it's a little bit different, locked and loaded, but I've got a guest. Her name is Laura Carno, and she runs a program called F.A.S.T.E.R Colorado. Yes, we imported her all the way from Colorado to talk about this with all of you today. F.A.S.T.E.R stands for Faculty Administrator Safety Training and Emergency Response. Laura, thank you so much for being with us. You did a Shaftesbury with us. Now we're going to do another video with you. Real quick, tell us what F.A.S.T.E.R is. And then I've got a question about, there's a change in the mood of the country around this, so we might be at a moment. But tell us first about F.A.S.T.E.R.
So what we do at F.A.S.T.E.R is that we train the very many armed school employees who are in Colorado schools today. And we've been doing this for 6 years. We're in our 6th training year and have seen nearly 300 school staffers in Colorado who are armed right now to protect children on those campuses. And you're right, since Uvalde rocked the country. It shook parents to their core. And
tell us about that, because we're from Colorado, and we're home of Columbine, which was in the late 90s, 1999, but that changed how law enforcement responded to a shooting at a school. They were no longer just going to sit around outside and wait for it to be safe to go in.
Right.
They were going to storm the school until Uvalde.
Right.
And then it changed.
Yeah, and actually a little bit before that school resource officer in Parkland.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Who didn't go in.
Okay.
But Uvalde was all of the law enforcement. There was even a law enforcement officer whose wife was a teacher in that classroom who ended up dying, that he was trying to go in, and the other law enforcement officers kept him out. And so that is the part that really shook the country, that the only people who could have protected those children were those two teachers in that room. And they probably did as much as they could to shield children. But in the end, they died and the children died.
And you think about that, one of the teachers who died did what she was supposed to, called for help, and then help was prevented from coming. So what do we do? And that's part of what F.A.S.T.E.R is. You train school personnel to stop an active shooter and to stop the bleeding.
Right.
Tell us about that real quick.
Yeah, the medical portion of the training is the one that's not often talked about or thought about. But when there have been people shot, whether they're children or faculty members, if you can't stop the bleeding before the medics get there, that person's going to die. And so to have medically trained staff, and even in some of the armed schools, a lot of employees want to be part of the solution, but they know they're not part of that armed team. They don't want to do that. They'll get medically trained so that there are even more medical resources if, God forbid, the worst thing happens on one of those campuses.
And then you also train those that want to be. These are all volunteers. If they want to be trained, they can be trained to stop an active shooter.
Correct.
And that's 3 days of intensive training.
Right.
For the first, and you have to pre-qualify?
Right. To even get into one of our classes, these are not beginner classes. They're very advanced. So if somebody has had only minimal training, we actually tell them they need to go get some prerequisite training so that they are ready to come to the F.A.S.T.E.R training.
And folks, just so you know, I've seen this, and I have a concealed weapons permit. I do conceal carry. You'll never know because I'll never tell you. But I couldn't pass the class. I know that because I've seen it. And I went, you know what? That's not in my skill set. I'm not that good. But that's the beauty of F.A.S.T.E.R. You've been doing it for 6 years in Colorado. The law is written in such in Colorado that school districts can decide if they want to have armed or trained and armed personnel in their building. And you said, we've talked about this. A lot of rural schools do this. They've been the big start. They were the first adopters to it all. Uvalde has changed that.
Right. Yeah. Who we're hearing from now is not just those rural school districts or those smaller school districts, but these are, I would consider in Colorado, normal-sized school districts from 10 to 40 or 50,000 kids in a school district, and these are in major suburban areas, and I think that's going to be a really big change, because when one of these normal-sized school districts authorizes, and if they opt to have news coverage that they're doing that, I think that neighboring school districts of similar size, those parents are going to go to their school board meeting and say, we want our kids as protected as that other school district.
And that brings us back to North Carolina. We learned something today about North Carolina schools. Are the kids in North Carolina as safe as the kids in, I think there are 34 states that have a pathway to allow for armed school staff? What did we find out about North Carolina?
Yeah, I would say that children in, regardless of which state they're in, because remember that in those 34 states, not all schools have armed personnel.
Okay, good distinction.
But I would say that children in North Carolina and any other state that doesn't have the ability to have armed staff are absolutely less safe if the unthinkable happened on their campus than kids that have well-trained armed adults at the ready, as close as possible to the point of attack.
Laura, where do we find out more about F.A.S.T.E.R?
Yeah, so folks can go to FASTERcolorado.com. We've got lots of information there, videos, some documents of frequently asked questions and busting the myths, and you can click on contact and get right to me.
And if you want to find out more about this, please watch the entire video that we have from our Shaftesbury Society lunch. We answer a whole bunch more questions surrounding F.A.S.T.E.R and the training that is encompassed within the program. Laura, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you.